Last week we started a new worship series called The Whole Holy Life. And the basic premise is you have 168 hours in your week. Now you have a choice what to do with those hours. You could take this 1 hour and come to church, and those other 167 hours or whatever it is, you could use those to be fearful and to question the point of life and to be worried all the time and to never feel comfortable. Even devout people that you know, maybe they take 4 hours of churchy things. They come to worship, they go to a Bible study, they pray a little bit, they volunteer at the food pantry, and they take those 4 hours for God, and the other 164 hours are separated. We know people who have kind of sacred stuff over here and secular stuff over here. You have that option, or you have the option to be a whole person and to draw that all together, and to have 168 hours to live into God's dream for the world. Now this week, we follow in this series, is not just with all your moments of your life, but we're going to focus on some of those special moments where something breaks in. Something special breaks into your conscience. Something special breaks into your heart. It's these moments that you can't help but be touched by the grace and the power of the world around you. You can't help it. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what you think. The world comes and just overwhelms you. I want to tell you about my friend Amy. Not this Amy. There's another Amy who I know, and she was just a great person. She came to church and volunteered. She was a deacon in the church. She would love to bake the casseroles. She would love to go and help. She kind of like Barb organizes a bluegrass thing here. Back in Charlotte, Amy would organize this huge music festival that really allowed young people to play with adults and get their start and all that kind of stuff. She would do this on the huge stages, kind of like the kids are getting to do today. Amy would come on mission trips with me. She was joyful when you were around her. Other people were joyful. Her husband was Ted, and Ted was a quiet guy, but his smile was so wide that it was just loud. He had this majestic mustache that really helped his smile get so big. So you knew Ted was there all the time, and Ted went to all of his daughter's concerts. The daughter, she was in college, and she was learning to be a professional songwriter. She's really quite good. And he would go to all those concerts. He was so proud. They had a 17-year-old son who, he's a teenager. He's frustrated by life. He's annoyed by everything. Anyone have a teenager who's annoyed by everything? Ted and Amy had a teenager like this, but Ted did everything he could to make home a safe place for their boy. Ted and Amy together made family a verb. What are we going to do today? We're going to family. And it was kind of sacred the way that they connected through all the mess. It wasn't like life was perfect. It was a mess, but they made it work so well. They committed to each other. And then Tuesday morning, one of those Tuesday mornings in that hours where no one's awake. 17-year-old boys have turned off the video games. The grandparents aren't awake yet. There's that hidden time in there where nothing's supposed to happen. And Amy rolled over and Ted had just had a massive heart attack in the middle of the night. Nothing they could do. No reason, no expectation, no way to see it coming. It just happened. They had a really beautiful funeral. The daughter played her dad's favorite song. Everyone cried. People told stories to honor his life. People had a space to accept that grief. The senior pastor there did a great job of adding kind of tradition and putting Ted in a context of his life with the universe, but focusing on who he was, not letting go of that. It was a beautiful funeral. Even with babies, it was a beautiful funeral. Eventually, the emptiness that that family felt started to fill up with something. Because that day, that time that Ted passed, something was broken. Something had broken in the world, and it was hard to heal. It took time. That day, feelings were so chaotic, and the sense of that this world had any meaning was just disoriented. In the cracks grew despair and pain. In the cracks grew the question, can we trust God at all through this? And that day, at that time, even through all that, something else broke into the world that followed them through their grief and said, stay connected. Some spirit followed them, broke into the world at that time that could never break in at any other time in the world, and walked with them. Now, I don't want to talk about the death part of that. What I give you that was a Tuesday morning. And so I hung out. It was actually, it happened to be the anniversary of my father's death when I was a 17-year-old boy annoyed by everything in the world. So it was the day that I was already a little bit something. And so I was frustrated with the day. I thought, what is going on with this world? Why does it have to rain all at once? Wednesday morning, I woke up, and as the morning continued on, Henry called me. Henry was my best friend in Charlotte. He and his wife used to work in Allens Park, and they got a call. She's a pastor. She got called to serve a church in Charlotte, and 1 year later, almost to the day, I got called to go to Charlotte at the next church down the road from her. These were friends already, so we got to spend a lot of time and get to know each other wonderfully. They were so supportive as I moved in there, and they were pregnant. She was having an awkward pregnancy. Something to do with blood pressure. I don't know. There's so many things that can go wrong. Everything can be scary. But they kept her in the hospital as the time got closer and closer. They wanted to just monitor her. Nothing seemed imminent, but they wanted to monitor her. And on Wednesday morning, Henry calls me and says, hey, it's got to happen this afternoon. It has to happen. We're going to induce, and Emily's mother is flying into town. Can you go pick her up at the airport and bring her? She's already on the plane. Can you do? Absolutely, I'll go do that. So I get Mom, we grab a bite to eat. We get to the hospital at like 1 o'clock. And the baby comes that afternoon. Baby's great. Mom's great. Family's great. They are intentional parents if you've ever seen them. These are the couple who, they got the dog first and practiced. They found out their disagreements about dog training. They can still disagree about kid training, but it worked out. I loved being around them and their family, and we had this circle of support for their babies called Jack Henry, the first one. Back in May, I went to a conference back in North Carolina, which I'm sure I learned something about worship, but really the most exciting part of that was I got to go back and play trains with little Jack Henry, and I would jump the train over like the little cow he had on the train track, and he would say, "Trains don't fly." And I'd say, "Oh, okay, that's a good point. It's a good point." And he has a little brother now, and when they're born, how would I know this? They're super warm. They're just exothermic for a long time, and their heads smell like potpourri. Is this true? Yeah, at least theirs did. I don't know. Maybe it's Henry and Emily. But that afternoon that the baby was born, something broke into the world that cannot break into the world in any other place or time, and God said it was good. Something broke into the world that was beyond emotions. It didn't matter if you thought the world was dull and depressing and fearful and routine. Now it was joyful and it was holy. Something broke into that sense around them and reminded us, in all the world, there must be a purpose for us to be here. There must be even a purpose for Jack Henry. There must be a little purpose for Odin, for all of us. Now, whatever you believe about angels and prophecies and fancy stars and God's part in the whole process, whatever you believe about Jesus, the guy was born. Can we agree on that? He was born. Best guess is he was born in a poor little stable and maybe a cave, and at some point they put him in a little trough. We call it a manger, fancy word for just where the cows eat their hay. And of course, Mary and Joseph felt that flood of the sacred, and maybe there was something special sacred there. But for all of us, history cracked at that moment. Something just split into history at that moment, as big as it can. And 8 days later, that family, as intentional and loving as they could be, they wanted to honor that. They wanted to honor that moment when the Spirit came in. And so they took little baby Jesus. It wasn't quite a baptism. It was kind of a dedication. They brought the baby to church, and a priest looked at Jesus and said, God's going to use this baby for something. God's going to use this baby for peace, to heal the brokenhearted. God is going to use this child to challenge all those things that break our hearts. And God did. And when he was baptized, 30 years later, something like 30 years later, God had watched him fulfill that promise. People had watched Jesus grow up into a man of stature and morality and depth. And he goes down to be baptized. And the way the Bible says it, God sees him come up and says, "That's my boy. I love him. I'm proud of him." I cannot give anyone any parental advice, but if I can steal a word from God, I want to tell Timmy and Lauren that when Odin is 17 and annoyed by life, "You're my boy. I love you. I'm proud of you." It's God's model on how to parent. So as Jesus goes on and people start to wonder what he is all about, and Paul and other folks tell stories about him after his death, and eventually they write down these stories, and some of Jesus' lessons made great sense. Love your neighbors. Amen? Amen. Yeah. Love your enemies? Some of it didn't make as much sense. Some of it was so downright crazy that all they could do is write down his stories and just wait for somebody to come and explain it later. It's the best they could do. And eventually, as they struggled with what this all means, one person has an idea about it here, one person has a different idea. And they start to discuss, which turns into argument, which turns into sides, which turns into fighting. And eventually they're fighting about things that are important and things that aren't important. They're fighting about what to do with our life. They're fighting about what to believe in our life. They fight about religious stuff that really just belongs in a church, and that's all it belongs at. And they fight with everyday stuff that their whole lives are infused with. And through all of that, only a few things could hold them together through that fighting. One of them was baptism. And that's kind of what this Amy was reading in Paul's letter. One baptism. Through it all, one baptism is a shared marker that we are all here together through the chaos. One baptism marks that God gives us direction. One baptism marks that we are continually renewed by the Spirit. One baptism marks that we are eternally pointed to a beautiful now and a future of hope. One baptism reminds and remarks us to follow a purpose of peace and love. And may that mysterious something that breaks into the world on occasion, may it give you, as it's given you breath and life and a reason for being, may it follow you and guide you toward a depth of meaning that draws us into God's dream for wholeness and holiness. Amen.